Good evening, everybody. It is the 1st of June, 2023. Happy Pride Month, everybody. It's 6:04 p.m. I'm Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the planning board. With me tonight is Amelia Aboff, the vice chair, Erin Gino, the clerk, Jahan Habib, Luke Schuster, Michael McNeely, and Debbie Howard Easton. We have a full cadre of planning board members, and we have a number of items on our agenda tonight. But pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. An audio recording of these proceedings will be available by using the registration link at the top of the agenda. Once the meeting has concluded, this meeting is being recorded. We have a number of items on the agenda tonight. The first is meeting minutes from March 16th, 2023. We also have a number of public hearings. One has been previously continued. Two have been previously continued from previous meetings. We have two new agenda items. 16 and 20 Medford Street has two different applications seeking two different types of permits. And we also have an agenda item, 366 Broadway, which we will not be taking up. 366 Broadway needs to be re-advertised, and once it is re-advertised, it will be placed back on a new planning board agenda. So that agenda item will not be coming up tonight. So apologies to anybody in attendance who was looking to discuss that item. That was not advertised in the proper way, so we will reconvene on that at some time in the future. So I would like to have our clerk, Erin Gino, please read into the record the notice of public hearing for 16 and 20 Medford Street, parts A and B, please.
Sure thing. 16 and 20 Medford Street, PNZ 23-011, Somerville LLC seeks approval for a major amendment to a previously approved general building in the MR4 zoning district, just PNZ 21057, which required site plan approval and a special permit for household living. The other part is PNZ 23-012, Somerville Living LLC seeks a special permit for parking relief from the minimum parking requirements in the MR4 zoning district.
Sorry, I was muted. I was taking the meeting minutes from the 16th of March. Has everybody had a chance to review them? Does anybody have any comments, questions, or suggested revisions to those draft meeting minutes? Okay. Seeing none, the chair moves to approve the draft meeting minutes as the final minutes of the planning board for that date, seconded by Amelia. Rita, could I please ask you to call the roll?
This is Risa speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Erin Gino.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Okay, with the unanimous vote by members of the planning board, we have meeting minutes. Congratulations. The next item on the, Debbie, did I see you?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Before we get going, I did want to mention that I missed the May 18th meeting, but I did watch that along with the joint meeting with the Land Use Committee and submitted the appropriate affidavit certifying to that. Thank you.
And Debbie, I see Jahan's hand. Thank you. I see Jahan's hand next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to my fellow board member, I also missed the May 18th board meeting. However, I was able to watch the video and I also submitted the affidavit for the record. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to jump on this train. I missed the March 4th meeting. I also watched that meeting on the recorded video and have supplied an affidavit to that end. Anybody else want to make any disclosures or share anything for the fun or good of the meeting? I would like to bring up next 620 Broadway, which is a case that was previously opened, heard, testimony taken, and continued for discussion this evening. And I see that Emily is present and has perhaps an update and some discussion that we can engage in.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here this evening with mobility planner Greg Hannafin, who is also present and a panelist. And I believe the attorney for the project, Bill Croya, is in attendance as well. I did just want to clarify for the board so they have all of the information. The applicant has continued to work with mobility and keep me in the loop as well regarding the loading plan. There has been a good amount of discussion back and forth on what's necessary. The applicant has been receptive. But the mobility division has clarified to me that this is a process that is going to need additional review and details than what's typically necessary for a loading plan, because it will require an analysis and restriping plan of the full street at that section of Broadway. To that end, I wanted to confirm to the full board that the conditions that mobility proposed to the planning board are fully acceptable to mobility, and they are comfortable they're comfortable with the planning board moving forward with a decision if that is the planning board's desire. If not, mobility and PPZ staff will continue to work with the applicant. But we wanted to be present and clarify the situation. We have proposed an edit to one of the proposed conditions that was in the staff memo that we submitted to you all last week, and that has been posted online. And with that, I can take any questions that you might have for myself or for Greg.
Emily, I'm gonna let my other fellow board members speak. I certainly have some thoughts on this matter, as I believe others do as well. Could you, for the benefit of the board and the public, review briefly the proposed conditions that staff has laid out to potentially ameliorate some of the concerns that members of this board have raised and that I share?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So the original conditions that were proposed by mobility and provided to the planning board in the memo submitted by PPZ staff, in the original memo, there were two of them. The first one states that Botanica LLC shall submit an updated transportation access plan, or TAP, subject to review and approval by the Director of Mobility, which identifies a loading zone within 300 feet of 620 Broadway, sufficient to serve the largest delivery vehicle type anticipated for this use. And I would note that this condition was proposed to be attached to the site plan approval application. The other condition, which was proposed to be attached to the special permit for cannabis retail sales, states the applicant shall develop and implement a sign and pavement markings plan for Broadway between the Broadway bridge deck and the crosswalk at Winchester Street that enhances safety conditions and protection for people bicycling and reduces opportunities for illegal curbside parking and loading. Final design must be approved by relevant city departments. And that is the condition that we've proposed revisions to. So with the proposed revisions, the condition would read, the applicant shall develop and implement a sign and pavement markings plan for Broadway between the Broadway bridge deck and the crosswalk of Winchester Street, including a designated loading area for 620 Broadway that enhances safety conditions and protection for people bicycling and reduces opportunities for illegal curbside parking and loading. Final design must be approved by relevant city departments, including but not limited to mobility engineering, and PPZ prior to a certificate of occupancy. I do also want to clarify that the Mobility Division is confident that this loading zone can be located on the same side of the street as 620 Broadway, so it would be adjacent to the site. They do not believe that it will need to be located further down the street or on the opposite side of the street.
Emily, thanks. So from what I gather from those conditions, and from your explanation of them, is effectively we would be delegating our discretion in reviewing the loading zone issue as well as some of the signing matters to mobility by way of those conditions. I also want to let the public know public testimony has closed, so to the extent that folks want to testify on this, testimony is closed. This is now a matter of discussion between members of the planning board and staff and of the applicant. So my concerns, Emily and board, is this: we have in the past delegated certain sign-offs to city staff that are usually somewhat minor in scope. What color the shingles will be, make sure certain things meet certain box checking matters. To me, this is not that. The signage and the road painting and stuff, yeah, fine, okay. But when we're talking about, again, this is me speaking as one member. When we're talking about the location and functionality of a loading zone on a major street across from a T-stop that's undergoing some significant renovation and will be going through significant replanning and repurposing over the next period of months and years, I don't like the idea of ceding the planning board's authority to have a fulsome review by mobility that the planning board can review. That is our purview, that is our jurisdiction. To pass along something that's the way that a building functions on a street and in a neighborhood is not something that I feel comfortable just passing off to city staff, as professional and wonderful as they are. That's no disparagement on the quality of staff and staff's review and staff's professionalism and ability to assess these things. I do think that this is something that and I know that this is something that we have required of other applicants in the past to come to us with a plan and with actual sign off and fulsome review. We just did it on a project on McGrath Highway a few months ago, for example. So for me to have this as a cast off for something that staff can deal with, that's not something that I'm comfortable with. That's something that I think the planning board has a responsibility to review, and that does have the burden of staff having to do a fulsome review and a fulsome report on it, because they always have. This is something that we asked of the applicant months ago, and that is usually something that is presented in a fulsome application to staff and to the planning board. That is incorporated within a staff memorandum that we can review and assess and deliberate on, take testimony on. And for me, this goes beyond it's small enough that that the planning board shouldn't necessarily deliberate on the merits of this, and staff can do it. So I'm for one not comfortable ceding that kind of responsibility that sits within the planning board to have a fulsome discussion on, along with members of the public to know how this is going to work on the street and in the neighborhood. Because if I could cede a bunch of big stuff to staff, that would make our job a hell of a lot easier, but that's not why we're here. So those are my thoughts on the proposed conditions. So I'm not supportive of ceding that to staff, and I would be in support of having a fulsome review by mobility like we do with every of a project. This isn't new. This isn't unique to this applicant. This is something the planning board has expected and required of everybody else. And this would be breaking with what we do for everybody else in a pass off to staff and conditioned. And that's not something that I'm comfortable with going forward, because I think that puts the planning board at a little bit of exposure going forward if we treat this particular application differently than we have others. So that's where I sit. I'm certainly happy to listen to my board members, and maybe you can convince me otherwise if you feel differently. But that's where I am on this particular issue. And Emily, thank you very much for explaining it. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with staff. I hope they know it. This has to do with the jurisdiction and responsibility of the planning board and the expectations that we place on applicants.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. If I may, I fully respect that. And we did not mean this in any disrespect. We just wanted to make sure you all have all of the information.
For sure. Thank you. Those are my thoughts on the matter. I don't usually like to go forward, but I wanted to tonight just because this one is a little bit different for that reason. Does anybody else? I saw Luke's hand first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at my notes, just a few scattered questions. Maybe I'll just ask them all because they're related to each other in a way. Curious, in particular for staff's response, but also if the applicant had any responses. The first is I'm just trying to track why we don't have the transportation access plan yet. And is it the applicant moving slowly and they could have moved faster had they done so? It seems like from some of the materials, if I'm recalling this correctly, that part of it is related to the timing of the broader street redesign. And so perhaps a piece of why there's no plan yet is out of their control, and it's because staff is asking for it to move more slowly so it can be fully integrated with the broader plan for that stretch of Broadway. So I'm curious about why we don't have one when in other circumstances we would have. Another question is, I'd love to just get a sense, to the extent we can predict this, what not going with the staff proposal would mean in terms of the length of a likely delay. In my mind, a modest delay is just far less of a cost than a likely long delay. And then I understand the chair's concerns around precedent and doing something that's out of the norm here. I am curious what the likelihood of the staff negotiated plan on something like this ultimately being different from what the board would want at the end of the day is. Now, again, maybe that's just impossible to anticipate, but as a new member, I have no way to anticipate what that is. And if it's just sort of a hypothetical concern, but in almost every instance, the board is usually very happy to follow the lead of mobility, I think that also would sway my judgment on whether it's worth delaying the project by some amount. So that's my list of questions.
Thank you very much. I can start to answer those, and I'm going to rely a bit on mobility planner Greg Hanifin, who has just come on screen. So the applicant did submit a transportation access plan. It simply wasn't complete with an acceptable loading zone. So what mobility has proposed as a condition and needs is an updated transportation access plan that shows an appropriate loading zone to the specifications of mobility that appropriately takes the restriping of that section of mobility, not mobility, of Broadway into account. Let me see. believe you are correct, Mr. Schuster, that it is the broader street design that is what is moving this more slowly than other typical loading zones, because this loading zone is proposed on the street, and because that section of the street is going through a redesign. Greg, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. So everything that Emily said is correct. Provide some additional context. When the applicant was putting together their original TAP, the city around the same time was undertaking a restriping and a intersection improvements project at the Winchester and Broadway intersection. And there were some changes to the pavement markings done, which led to them to make a change to their TAP. And so rather than holding up their ability to submit their application at the time, there had been an agreement that we would continue to work on the loading plan in the with the new striping plan, because the change to the travel lane and the bike lanes removed the curbside area where the applicant was originally planning to have their loading zone. For now, currently, as Emily said, mobility feels like in order to really have a comprehensive loading plan here, we need to look at the whole cross section of Broadway. The striping pattern that's out there now was done kind of in a unique situation because of the Broadway Winchester project. We had the opportunity to create a new striping plan for part of the street, but if we were able to redesign this entire section, it would allow to create loading and add some parking on both sides of the street and adding a curbside bike lane. But if we're just looking at the side of the street that the applicant's project is on, it doesn't give us as much flexibility to create as safe and comprehensive of a loading plan as we would like. That's why we feel like here it's really important as part of the loading plan to look at the full cross section of the street. And I'm sorry if there were other questions that I have forgotten.
Mr. Chair, if it's all right with my colleagues, may I sort of add a question to this dialogue?
I certainly welcome it because I have a response to it as well, but yes.
I think that what Mr. Henneland was just describing is part of why I feel such concern about this application in particular. In the mobility documents that we did receive, there are references, there's some documentation about sort of what loading activities would be required, and it makes reference to a loading area on site, which we know is no longer the plan that the applicant is moving forward with. But in the documents where it's referenced about loading on site, there is a note about the frequency of deliveries and about daily armored car pickups. And when we've had other dispensary applications, one of the criteria that the planning board is tasked to look for in approving a cannabis retail location is the sufficiency of the location that's being selected for sort of safe operation of that use that has some concerns that not every business has. And as some of my board members who've been on long enough will recall from other marijuana use applications, there have been sort of lengthy discussions about the distance between a loading area and the front or back door of an establishment, and the need for, you know, when an armored car armored truck pulls in to do its cash pickup, that there's security there, and it's not necessarily the quickest operation because that's the nature of armored cars or what have you. So I do feel like there are some concerns specific to like the proximity of the loading zone to the facility and safety, both in terms of like marijuana and cash and in terms of cyclists that then arise from that. Like I do feel like there's a higher degree of the planning board's remit here is to make sure that this use is going to be appropriate for the location that we're discussing. And I guess I feel like many of the concerns that we are tasked with looking out for remain unresolved in this application at this time, in part due to that. And the concern about using the other side of Broadway suggests to me that it may be a more complicated answer. So that's, none of that was a question. I guess that was just a statement. Sorry.
No, Amelia, I appreciate that response because your tenure on this board is not quite what mine is, but it's certainly, you know, you've certainly been around for a little bit to see some applications that we have reviewed, many of which involve neighborhoods and streets and intersections that at one point will be or in the planning process of being restriped, revisited, rebuilt. I feel like every time I come back to Somerville, there's a new intersection, a new bump out, a new island or something. It's like whack-a-mole. You know, we just did 2 projects in the middle of Davis Square that involved, you know, loading concerns, and all of Davis Square is being looked at. We've looked at projects on, you know, Prospect Street and Webster Street. All of that street is looking at being rebuilt and revitalized and restriped. So the idea that we would hold off because the city is reassessing how the street will be striped and used and built isn't anything new. We've always looked at projects in the middle of major intersections that are in the process of perhaps being reconstructed. So I don't view that necessarily as a reason to treat this application any different than we would you know, the D2 blocks or half the projects that we've looked at in Davis Square or other parts of Magoon Square. So so I'm with you. I think there's a lot more to be done on this, and the idea that the city might be restriping or rebuilding it at some point in the next couple of months is actually the norm for a lot of the bigger projects that we've seen more recently, and not the exception. Yes, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair Aboff, for describing, I think, also my concerns with sort of punting the loading zone for a, you know, a non-contiguous approval. I think as one member, without being able to evaluate the loading zone in context of the building, we will not be able to accurately consider potential conditions to mitigate impacts of a loading zone wherever that may be, right? And by the one other concern that I have, and this is sort of the end of the statement, is by saying, okay, loading zone can happen while the construction is happening, and then certificate of occupancy only occurs once the loading zone has been identified and built. If for whatever reasons there is not a suitable loading zone, which, I mean, things happen, right? This is not a certainty. Best efforts believe absolutely fully trust mobility staff to try and find the best location. But without knowing what the potential impacts are or what the certainty of that loading zone might be, I have concerns that now we have a building that's built but is no longer eligible for a certificate of occupancy. And now we just have sort of a dead building where we can't evaluate this as a holistic, yeah, this is going to work great for the site, and we can really evaluate this thoroughly and add potential conditions as needed. So I share my fellow board members' concerns. about not evaluating these together.
Aaron, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any comments that they would like to make on this application? I see Michael's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just also would like to echo a lot of the comments that have been brought up already. And I guess the one little thing I would add in addition is that, you know, I don't think that this is somehow suggesting that just because there's flux in the way things are going to be striped or zoned even, that like no developer should, you know, be able to proceed with an application. I think this is a very specific case where that loading dock is a concept, is an important feature here. And so I just want to make that distinguishment because, you know, sowing doubt that if there's any possible change in the area, no applicant would be able to come forward and actually have a successful application is not, I think, what we're intending to say with this. So it's not what I would be saying if I said I was uncomfortable with proceeding as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Does anybody else have any comments or questions of staff at this time related to the discussion that we just had or of anything else? This is a general discussion with the planning board on this particular application. We just happen to have new issues. Yes, Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this question's sort of either for any members of the board or for staff, which is just the question, one of the many questions I asked when I started about what the likely delayed timeline is from a decision to punt this. How do you even think about that?
Mobility has been working with the applicant to come up with a striping plan here. We are in the process of putting together a conceptual design to hopefully be able to share with the applicant soon. I'm not able to give a specific delay, but it can sometimes take several months to come to get an approved striping plan on this type of project.
Do we have an idea of a response to Luke's concern?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, could you please identify yourself for the record?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Bill Proya for the applicant this evening. I appreciate all the conversation and staff's explanation. So just to recap what happened after the last board meeting, and again, thanks to Emily and Greg for within a couple days meeting with us, giving us some direction, which was helpful. And we did produce a conceptual plan for the south side of Broadway. At the time, we weren't aware of the requirement or the request to also provide a similar plan for the north side, which we're not objecting to at all. And we're not objecting to any of these things. I just really wanted to sort of reiterate something that Mr. Schuster asked. I think it was answered that we haven't been asking for this process, but we've been trying to be respectful of the city's process. But we hear what the board is saying, and we heard it seriously last time, so that's why we engaged planning and mobility right after the last hearing to try to get this thing done and complete. So, and we're still engaged and committed to do that. We, like Mr. Schuster, just hope that, and we'll react as quickly as we can once we get more direction from the departments. And I think, you know, one last thing I would say, and I don't expect it will be favorably received, but I'm going to ask anyway. I did ask last time. I know a couple of you weren't here, so you might remember my request, which was sort of splitting, the hair here is that having the board take a look at this again in a public hearing, but after the permit is granted. In other words, you'd be delegating the sort of the mechanics of the plan to mobility and planning and the applicant, but we wouldn't be able to implement it, or it wouldn't be finally approved without the board then having another chance to look at it. That would permit us, at least on other aspects of the project, to work things through, like construction drawings, financing potentially. So that might alleviate some of the delay issues that Mr. Schuster was raising that we share. So it's just a suggestion, maybe something to consider and discuss, but it may help solve both problems that I'm hearing tonight and that I share. I understand that. We're not trying to avoid something that other applicants were required to do, but I do think there is some validity to the circumstances here. And again, I hear what Chair Capuano was talking about, that the streets are changing all the time, and why is this different? And I don't have the information or the knowledge that you folks have. I was just, trying to take my lead from mobility on this point. So thank you for letting me weigh in on that a little bit, and I'll be quiet for a while now.
Attorney Broy, I appreciate your comment. The question that I have is, as I remember this application and discussion on this application, which has been going on for a few months, I think the first question that we had on the provision of a corrected and updated TAP was maybe sometime back in February or March. And for whatever reason, you guys opted not to produce it at that time. And I think we kept asking for it. So to be put up against, kind of this timeline of what happens if we punt it now, to my memory, this is something that we've been asking for a little while, and I'm not sure why we haven't received it. And if my memory's failing me, that's certainly not the first time. But I think this isn't a new question. I think this isn't something that kind of cropped up and all of a sudden where, oh my God, what are we going to do with the timing on this? I think this is something that maybe Amelia had raised several meetings ago, and I don't think it's been addressed since then. So that's my memory of the history of this particular application. But my memory is not perfect. It's pretty good, but it's not perfect. So I don't necessarily agree respectfully with the idea that you've been kind of working with what we've been looking for. I think we've been looking for this for quite a while. But so those are my thoughts. I don't know if anybody else on the board has any comments or questions at this time. I see Michael.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on that applicant's last set of comments, because this concept was brought up at the last meeting as well. I think approving the permit now and then saying that we've got another hearing later to discuss it either strips our authority to reject the issue that we have, or it doesn't actually grant you the permit in the first place. So in the case of kind of stripping our authority to review it, that doesn't necessarily make me feel any more comfortable. And in the case that we can revoke, I don't see how that solves your problem. Like, financing isn't going to accept a conditioned special permit that can be revoked, right? So at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to solve the board's concern, and I don't think we're going to solve your concern either. Thank you.
Frankly, Michael, I'm not so sure that a conditional approval is something that we can grant under law anyway. That's not something I've really dug into, and because I don't want to do it and I don't want to ask the question. because that's not something that I've been on the board now since 2008. I've not seen one like that. So, I see Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, this is actually a comment for, when this does come back to us with a approved loading zone situation, just so we can get out of the way. The solar panels, I believe, were a question that has not been yet addressed. There's some confusion on whether it's solar ready or if they're going to be installed solar panels, and the sort of LEED level certifiability of the building. So just putting this sort of comment, or at least my comment as one member, out there now, so that way when we do come back with a complete application with a loading zone that we can kind of consider for the specific cannabis retail use, I would love to see more description on that photovoltaic capacity of this building, so we can proceed without any further delay, at least as one member.
We've been talking about this now for about 40 minutes. I think I have a sense from the board that we, along with myself, are not prepared to make a vote on this application. I think there is more work to be done, and we encourage the applicant to work with staff to get that work done. So what I'd like to do now is move to continue this application to when is our next meeting? Is it the 14th, Raisa? Am I wrong?
This is Raisa speaking. The next meeting would be on June 15th.
15th. I'm sorry, I'm a day off. So I would like to move to continue this to the 15th, and if I will suggest to the applicant that if a formal recommendation by Mobility at least is not prepared by that date, such that it can be incorporated within a supplemental staff memorandum, then I would request the applicant take the initiative to request a continuance therefrom. Otherwise, this board will do that. So with that, I move to continue this application to the 15th of June, seconded by Amelia. Raisa, could you please call the roll?
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Aaron Gino.
Aye.
Shahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Unanimous vote to continue this discussion to the 15th. I welcome the applicant back then, hopefully. Next on the mic is my man Hank. Next up is 51 Prospect Street, which has previously been continued from our last meeting. So I would welcome the applicant and staff to come forward and talk about any modifications that were made on the application and the project since we last discussed it.
This is Raisa speaking. If the applicant team can please raise their hand so I'm able to unmute you. This is Raisa speaking. I do see some hands raised. I see a hand raised for Eamon McGillen. Ian, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
Thank you. Sorry, I believe Meredith Borak is going to do the presentation.
This is Raisa speaking. Meredith Borick, you have been unmuted.
Thank you, Raisa. This is Meredith Baraka. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you like me to begin, or were you gonna hear from staff?
If you have a new presentation that will be benefited by a supplementation from staff, that's great. Pictures are always good, because we certainly had a discussion on a lot of things that might
I would
benefit
be
from an updated presentation if you have one.
certainly, and thank you again, Mr. Chair and members of the board for having us this evening. And before I share my screen, I do want to express our thanks to the City of Somerville planning staff. I know Director Lewis, I don't think is joining this evening, but also to City Planner Graminsky for their guidance over the last several years. And also acknowledge, as you said, Mr. Chair, that Eversource has received the staff's second supplemental memo. So we have about a 5-minute presentation to review those recommendations.
This is Raisa speaking. Meredith, I'm making you into a presenter. Once you've been made into a presenter, you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you, Raisa. Okay, does everybody see the heading Somerville Planning Board? Okay, thank you, everybody. So again, I want to reiterate that adding a third transformer to Eversource's Prospect Street substation is essential for reliably meeting the city's future electrical demand. The third transformer is urgently needed and will be used to serve development that is either planned, already approved, or under construction in areas such as Boynton Yards, Union Square, and the future Somerville Gateway Innovation Center. Eversource's forecast for electrical demand shows the capacity of Somerville's Prospect Street substation being exceeded in the summer of 2024, jeopardizing the company's ability to provide reliable electric service. So tonight we are asking for your support to move this project forward and ensure we can deliver sufficient electricity to the city every day, all day. So now on to the requests. Eversource has been working diligently to respond to the request raised during the May 4th meeting, and we are looking forward to sharing those responses with you tonight. As suggested by the board, Eversource has revised its landscaping plan to include all native species as well as a shade tree, and the second revised landscape and tree plan was submitted to staff on May 24th. On the second request to use dimensional bricks on the proposed screening wall, over the last month, Eversource has been working diligently with our engineers, architect, and the wall manufacturer to find a solution that balances the required accessibility to our equipment with the aesthetic design requests of the board. The Prospect Street side of the walled enclosure must have removable columns and wall sections so that the third transformer and other large pieces of equipment can be easily repaired or even removed and replaced quickly and safely. Having complete access to the transformer allows for faster service restoration and limits the potential duration of any power outage. I know priority for both Eversource and the city. The removable wall sections and the pilasters will be precast concrete overlaid with a thin brick and mortar. This will be applicable to both the wall sections and the pilasters on the Prospect Street side. Door openings, space for art installations, and other details can be incorporated into the design. This type of brick facing can be seen on the wall panels at Eversource's Colburn Street substation in Boston, where it matches the facades of the surrounding buildings. And as you'll see here at the Boston substation, the columns are not brick, but it is our intention to do so at the Prospect Street site. And I do have some photographic examples of this thin brick system in the appendix, if that would be helpful. Now let's look at the other two sides of the enclosure. And again, to repeat myself, over the last month, we've been working with our engineers, architects, and the wall manufacturer, and we are pleased to let you know we have a solution where on the other two sides of the enclosure, a stonemason could construct a wall in front of the precast concrete panels and around the pilasters using full dimensional brick and incorporating design details such as faux windows and a mural. If it's the preference of the board that for consistency reasons, the thin brick overlay be used on all three sides of the walled enclosure, then Eversource is amenable to that request as well. We hope these responses satisfy the board's requests, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration with the neighborhood and the city at large. And again, tonight we are asking for approval of this project so that we may begin construction of this critical infrastructure without delay. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing my screen, but happy to bring back anything that you may find helpful, and happy to help field questions with our subject matter experts.
You know what? I almost wish you didn't stop sharing your screen, because you had something on there that I do want to discuss that I thought was really interesting, which was the idea of partnering. Thank you. With the Somerville Arts Council to solicit a local artist, because obviously this, having the substation is not the prettiest thing in the world. We all acknowledge that. I will just say I appreciate you working to meet some of the planning board's requests on, and the public's requests on making this kind of less of a monstrous utility type of thing. And the idea of partnering with a local artist to make this even more visually appealing, I think is certainly beneficial to the project. So I noticed that on the last slide that you still have up.
Yes,
so thank you for that.
That's a thank you, Chair Capuano, for that. And as has been discussed, I think at the May 4th meeting, and certainly with staff and neighbors as well, we are ready, willing, and able, and looking forward to partnering with the Somerville Arts Council, as well as the direct abutters and the neighbors at large, to work on public art installations. In the renderings we have here, we have them shown here, but oops, sorry, wrong way. It's also our intention, if it's the desire of the Somerville Arts Council and the community, to put them on the Newton Street side, or a mural or whatever is acceptable on the Newton Street side as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a great idea. I also very much appreciate you working to address the concerns of the public and of the board on the landscaping materials and the greenery materials that you're using. I am one person that prefers and always demands of applicants, when I can, the use of full dimensional brick, because I think it looks better, but I also acknowledge the reality of this not being the usual application that we see, and that there is a functional component to being able to access the machinery. So the idea of having the removable panels with the facade brick is, for me as one member, seems like that's going to meet the requests that I heard on the recordings, as well as my concerns as one member, so long as you put the full dimensional brick on the other 3 sides that I believe you said is something that you are able to do.
Yes, other 2 sides. So the walled enclosure, just to clarify for members of the board, is a 3-sided enclosure.
Again, kind of unique to the buildings we see here.
Indeed.
So, and my third thought is, I know that there was a big discussion on, could this be relocated? Can we condition? We can't condition you to relocate the substation to someplace else. Legally, it's just not something we could do. Were it preferential to go someplace else that might not be as present to this neighborhood? Sure, but that's not something that this board has the authority to do. So right now we're trying to make the best of what we have, and try to make sure that we don't get rolling brownouts.
Understood. Yeah, you can't see me nodding because my camera's on, but yes, I'm nodding along with you.
I have used more electricity in the last 3 years than I have in the 10 prior years, as I think a lot of people have. So working from home. So I would love to be able to open it up to planning board. Andrew, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add on the staff side of things prior to me opening up for discussion by the board, but you are certainly welcome to address the board and be available.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Chair Capuano. Through you, and for the record, Andrew Graminsky, planner, planning, preservation, zoning. Happy to be here. I have no new comments at this time, but happy to provide any sort of staff feedback, responses to questions or comments that the board has.
I kind of made my thoughts No. Does anybody else have any comments or questions that they'd like to make at this time? I see Jahan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This is a question for the applicant. First of all, I wanted to mention that I think the site looks, as it's been rendered, looks far better than the current existing site. So I'm very appreciative of that, particularly due to its location and the proximity to Union Square, as well as the local and adjacent residents. I just want to get a better understanding of what is the plan for maintenance. And what I mean by maintenance is not just landscaping, but should there be any issues that come up, years from now? Would love to hear about your policy or monitoring mechanisms towards ensuring that the substation location looks well kept and maintained throughout its presence/existence.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Habib, for that question. Chair Capuano, if I may answer. And this is Meredith Baraka speaking again. So we have our operations team who monitors and handles the day-to-day electrical maintenance of the substations, and also, working hard to keep them ship shape. I do have Paul Graham, who's our project manager, with us this evening. If you would like some additional details, if he can be unmuted, I'm sure that I could turn the mic over to Paul and he would be able to provide you with some additional information.
This is Raisa speaking. Paul, you have been unmuted. You're self-muted on your end.
All right, I think I'm there now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So specifically, what type of maintenance are you asking? Like annual maintenance, landscaping maintenance?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. I'm just trying to get a better sense of what is the standard plan. Obviously the site will look as rendered, and photos will look terrific. However, I just want to get a better sense of what the plans are, and anything that you could share would be very helpful.
So when I think of maintenance, of course, I'm thinking equipment maintenance, and that would be constant. You're thinking of what the building, the maintenance of the facade, etc.
That's right.
And the photograph or part of the PowerPoint that Meredith presented, that facade's almost 20 years old now, and it's basically maintenance free. We do plan to apply a graffiti resistant coating to all the bricks, because there has been some tagging in the neighborhood and on the equipment that we have there now, to try to, that won't be like a constant us going there to do something, but it would certainly be a spot thing if it happens. But the brickwork will be coated with something the spray paint doesn't stick to. I'm not sure what the material's called. As far as the area with the plantings, that's on a regular, during the summer, I'm sure they're there every 2 weeks. Not sure where else to go with the maintenance part. Like I said, it's mainly maintenance free. The fence is plastic coated. Everything else is galvanized. It's not meant to be
sure
painted.
Mr. Capuano, if I may, this is Meredith Baraka again, and I would also offer Mr. Habib and to members of the board and anyone on the public who might be listening, certainly if there's an issue with a tagging or something that's untoward on the property, anybody should feel free to call us at Eversource, whether it's my outreach team or our community relations team, and we will address it post haste.
Thank you so much for the response. I think that's really helpful in understanding both.
Jahan, your voice cut out.
Sorry. Let me just go back and repeat. So that's very helpful to understand not only the materials that are being used, but also more importantly, if the members of the public or if members of even this planning board notice something, that we have the opportunity to contact your colleagues who will hopefully remedy this situation. So thank you very much. That's very helpful, and thank you, Mr. Chair, as well.
I actually, not that I'm an artist and not that I'm digging into the weeds on, over conditioning or anything like that. I actually think this would be a great location for like street or graffiti art. like that's exactly what a facade like this is kind of meant for. But that's just me. Who else? Aaron, did I see your hand today? Nope. Okay, I saw Michael's.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the applicant was kind enough to answer most of my questions at the last meeting. So I just have one follow-up. This came up both in public comments as well as I believe Councilor Tu mentioned it, that there were some concerns that this project could impede the expansion of the Green Line. And I think I'm having a really hard time understanding the concern here. So this project is kind of on the northeastern side of the parcel. And it looks to me like the train would continue kind of on or near where the rail currently extends for, I believe, the commuter rail. So can staff just maybe explain to me, you know, if there's any risk or any chance that the train will actually extend into the northern part of this parcel?
Can I, Mr. Chair, respond?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So I'm not a mobility expert, so I may have to, I'm not sure if Greg from Mobility is still present to answer that question, but from my knowledge, most of the constraints are sort of above this site, especially the bridge, and then some of the other adjacent parcels that all the way up to Porter Square. It would be the similar effort that was taken with the Green Line extension, you know, to the other current Green Line stops through Somerville. And I believe if you look back at the rendering, the applicant can describe this better. There is a site where they couldn't fully enclose a fence because of the needs of the MBTA, but I'm pretty sure that was just for access. It wasn't necessarily because it was impeding any of the trains. Again, I would have to refer again to mobility in our transportation team and engineering for more specifics. But I believe that Eversource did get a notification or letter from the MBTA saying that this improvement wouldn't be impeding that. And again, it's what's actually improving on the site is the new transformer.
That's helpful. And just to be super clear on this, I'm also talking about the potential extension up to Porter Square, not just the impact to the current existing project.
I see. Gotcha. So I believe a lot of the site constraints for our potential Green Line extension to Porter Square would be the pinch point is the bridge. The bridge would have to be widened, and that whole area would have to be redesigned. And then just like again with the other Green Line extension, there would have to be acquisitions of property, etc.
Sure, but that again isn't part of this like northern application, right? That's the other part that is already existing. Okay, and
correct.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Again, we need to confirm this information with mobility, but that's the knowledge I at least have at this time.
This is Raisa speaking. I'm really sorry to interrupt. Greg is still here. Greg, if you would like to speak, you're welcome to do so now.
Thanks, Raisa. I am not personally familiar with this project or the instance that's being discussed, but I can certainly take it back to my team and talk to the project manager who's more familiar with this.
Mr. Chair, this is Meredith Baraka speaking from Eversource. If it would be helpful to the board, I have an aerial if that shows sort of our property line, and this may be not quite what your question was, Mr. McNeely, but happy to share my screen again to show sort of our property boundary in relation to the tracks versus the new equipment.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Can everybody see this on my screen? Okay. Yeah, so just to, sometimes it's easier to visualize things. So this is the, as you mentioned, Mr. McNeely, the area for the application before you this evening. And here you can see the commuter rail tracks. And I think this is the Webster Ave Bridge that Mr. Gurminski mentioned.
Mr. Chair, may I add something while we have this up on the screen?
Of course.
Thank you. Through you, I just want to note that I also had this question, but I reread the staff memorandum that was originally provided on this case, and there is a note that says the MBTA confirmed that the installation of a new transformer would not have any impact on the MBTA right-of-way running along the south of the property. And I'm sure Mr. McNeely is also looking at that and thinking about, but I guess I don't know enough about the concept for the extension, but I would have imagined that it was running along the same right-of-way in this location. And to the extent that there's a new transformer going in that will give additional capacity, that might even make it easier to relocate the old equipment at some point in the future. I don't know, but my concern, I also noted the community's concern about this issue, but felt like it was adequately addressed by the MBTA's report that staff included in the memo, in case that's relevant or useful to others.
Thank you for pointing that out.
And Michael, if your understanding is that the right of way for that connection would go somewhere other than the existing right of way, I defer to your better knowledge of the project. I do not.
Does anybody else? I see Aaron's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank the applicant for coming back to us with native plantings and full brick. I super appreciate that. And, hope that you'll take just as good of a care of the native plantings as you will the brick, and watering them through droughts and such as part of that maintenance plan. At the same time, I just want to take this opportunity to echo some comments from the public and from our local councilors, as noted in earlier meetings, which, sort of notwithstanding my appreciation of this particular project, I'm a little bit, as sort of one member of the board, maybe a more importantly member of the community, that poor planning in this case kind of constitutes our emergency to approve this as is and not consider, say, locating this in the basement of one of the large lab buildings or potentially some other appropriate thing. So that's just a comment to echo the public. I don't, doesn't necessarily constitute anything about this particular thing, but I did want to just take that moment to, reiterate the important public comments that we get as part of this application. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Amelia, you back up.
Mr. Chair, thank you through you. Just riffing a little bit on Aaron's comment, I wonder if that's a request that we could make of staff, that if there are projects like this that are in the early stages that are coming down the road, to the extent you're aware of them, perhaps they could be informal items on the board's agenda, earlier out. If there is, it seems like there might have been a time and a place for coming up with a better version of this plan, and it was far too far along by the time it made it here, and we respect that. But if there is any opportunity to use the forum of the planning board as a vehicle for engaging with the community in a really early stage of planning any similar project in the future, as one member, I would love if that's something that you could consider keeping on our radar in the same way that we get updates on neighborhood plans.
I will talk to you separately about that, but that's certainly something that I've had on my mind as well. That's not something that's within our official purview, because we get cases as they are applied for and are advertised and set on agendae. So we don't have an official role to play kind of earlier in the process, but it's certainly something that I think we could have an informal role in certain circumstances. So I do share that.
Understood, and I don't mean to go beyond our authority. It was on a voluntary thought only.
No, I mean, the reality is not only are we members of this board, we're also members of this community. So that's why we're here, because we actually love our city. Does anybody else have any comments or questions that they'd like to make of the applicant or staff, or discussion that they'd like to raise at this time, or any other proposed conditions that they'd like to discuss imposing on this particular application for discussion? Seeing none. Following public testimony, review of the submitted materials and deliberation of the required considerations outlined by the zoning ordinance, I move to approve with conditions outlined in the staff memorandum, the special permit to establish a minor utility facility use in the commercial core and mid-rise 4 zoning districts, seconded by Amelia. Raisa, could you please call the roll?
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Aaron Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Congratulations to the applicant. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Chair Capuano and members of the board.
Thank you. Have a nice night. With that, I would like to bring the last 2 agenda items to the floor. They are 2 separate applications that relate to the same 2 parcels. So it's 16 and 20 Medford Street. And in the planning board's general practice, when we have 2 separate applications that require different votes and different considerations and different permits, but they relate to the same project, we take the presentation as a whole, we take public testimony as a whole, and we generally take discussion as a whole, but then we'll be required at the end to take separate votes. So I don't know who of this applicant team needs to be unmuted or shared or whatever the circumstance might be.
This is Raisa speaking. Mr. Chair, I have a list of names for tonight's speakers. Brian McGrail, you have been unmuted. Tanya Kiriu, you have been unmuted. You're self-mute on your end. Dave Giangrande, you've also been unmuted. You are self-mute on your end. Also, we have Aaron Hussaini Fitch. You've also been unmuted. Last name on the list is Ugo Paul DeBais. I'm really sorry if I ruined that name. All of you have been unmuted. If you can please let me know who will be the presenter tonight so I can make someone the presenter for tonight.
For the record, if I may, Mr. Chair. For the record, Attorney Brian McGrail for the applicant in Ricer. I'm going to make a brief introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to Tanya Carrier, who will present a PowerPoint presentation with perhaps some input of our other team members that are present tonight. But she will take the lead on the presentation once I give my introduction.
This is Raisa speaking. Tanya, you've been made into a presenter for tonight.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna take a brief introduction, if I may, Chair Capuano and members of the planning board. For the record, my name is Brian McGrail. I'm an attorney with offices at 607 North Avenue in Wakefield, Massachusetts, here on behalf of the applicant, Somerville Living LLC, regarding 16 and 20 Medford Street. To give you some perspective on our team members, with us tonight is Hugo DiBiase on behalf of Somerville Living LLC. Tanya Carrier is an architect with CALSA Design. She is our architect for this project. David Giangrande is with GM2. He is our traffic consultant. Erin Hussaini Fitch is with Verdant Landscaping Architect. She is our landscape architect. And I think perhaps John Roden is here. Maybe not, but in any event, he's been involved in the project. He's from Lean Green Building, Inc. He's our passive housing and energy consultant. So those are our team members. As was mentioned at the beginning, these are 2 related applications regarding the property. The first is a major amendment to a previous approval of a general building site plan approval and a special permit for household living that was granted for the property. We're proposing some amendments to that, which have been deemed to be major. by the planning department, which we agree with. And so that has brought us with this application before the board. As it was mentioned, there's a second application, and that's for a new special permit for parking relief from the minimum parking requirements that will be required if the major amendment is approved by the planning board. So we appreciate the opportunity to present in a consolidated fashion for efficiency purposes. We want to thank the administrative staff. We've worked very closely with them, or my team has, throughout this process to get to this point. We appreciate their hard work on this. With that said, Chair Capuano, I'd like to hand it off to Tanya to commence the presentation for the board.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Tanya Carrier from Culsa Design. Thank you, Brian, for opening up. So here I have a slide just showcasing our kind of timeline since we have been at this for a while. So we started about 2 years ago with our pre-submittal meeting. And the last time you guys saw us was back in August of 2022. And since then, we've made some significant changes to the project, but tried to keep a lot of what was presented and all of the comments that we formally received from you guys within the project scope. So now we're back here seeking a major amendment and a special permit to the previously approved special permit and site plan approval that we received in September of 2022. And since it has been a while, I will give a general overview of the project, and I think there might be a couple new team members here. So the project is at 1620 Medford Street. We are the existing Cubby Oils and Somerville gas station site. So the site is a bit unique as it fronts on 4 streets. So we have Medford Street, which is a pedestrian designated street by zoning, South Street, and then Bedford and Warren Street. And then we do have a rear, 2 rear facades, which we worked closely with you guys on the design prior. And here's a aerial view of our proposed building within the existing landscape. So you can see the massing. We are proposing a 4-story mixed-use building, a general style building per zoning. So it'd have commercial all along Medford Street with storefront glazing, and then residential units above. And this is a pretty detailed summary of our design revisions. We did limit the revisions to these that we will speak to here, and otherwise kept the design the same. So the first revision is we are proposing to increase the unit count from 41 units to 51 units. So that would be adding 10 units within the same shell and area that we proposed last time. And with that, hand in hand, we are proposing to change the building energy goals to net zero ready construction. And we actually want to go for the full passive house certification as well. We will still maintain the LEED Platinum certifiable design that we proposed last time. So the unit count increase is permitted by zoning with the net zero ready construction, since that allows higher density. We could actually go up to 58 units. We chose to go with 51 just to provide a better mix of unit types versus all studios. We wanted some 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and we have 3 bedroom affordable units. So with that, our total affordable units would be 10 dwelling, which is two added ones from our former proposal. The next change we did, we are revising the program for sale condominiums to rental units. And this was a owner decision due to the current market that's out there. And the other major change we are proposing is to remove the subsurface garage. So formerly we had parking in an underground, fully underground garage, and we also had 11 spaces at grade. We are proposing to remove the below grade garage due to some feasibility issues on the site, and maintain the surface parking, which is covered and concealed, and that would be 12 spaces. We fit in 1 extra space there. And one minor change.
Question for you.
Yep.
Actually, I'm going to have a lot here, but
Okay.
I'll start with one. Increasing the unit count from 41 to 51, adding some affordable units, sure. Getting rid of the garage, changing from condos to rental units, changing the materials, relocating the bike room from one place to another. How is this even considered a major amendment, not a completely new project?
If Andrew is on, he might be the best to answer that. But as I was going to get to, we are proposing to keep the entire facade the same and massing. The only change would be just to one material. It would still look the same. It would just be a material change on the bays. I think Andrew's here if he wants to speak to that.
Mr. Chair, through you.
Yeah, there are some more fundamental changes than just the materiality here, obviously. And also,
So,
as
I'm not going to.
It's not on this particular slide, but also the unit mix that we discussed quite at length. So we're going to have a long discussion on this application at some point. I'd like to hear the explanation of why this didn't come to us as basically a new application. I'll let you go through your presentation. But I'd like to hear from the public on this, and we'll see where we go.
Mr. Chair, may I speak?
Of course.
Thank you. Through you, I'm not going to speak on behalf of Director Lewis, who is the one who deemed this application a major amendment. However, from my understanding, is that with most of any projects that previously receive a site plan approval or other type of permit approval, the proper procedure is to go back for a plan revision, and typically it's through a submission to the Director of Planning, Preservation, and Zoning. She makes a determination if it's de minimis, not requiring board review, or a major amendment, which does require a board review, and then some additional steps, neighborhood meeting, and then another application. I'm going to ask Senior Planner Emily Hutchings to step in to provide some more information. But that's the knowledge that I have. But I'm happy we should let Emily speak as well. She can provide some more insight on that. Thank you so much.
For sure. Emily, I'd love to know, because does this have to do with the fact that we gave them a special permit for a completely different project 6 months ago? 7 months ago, something?
Thank you, Chair Capuano. Thank you, Mr. Grominski. So I'm not sure if there are specific concerns, but I think what has happened is the applicant requested changes to the project. They were quite significant, but it was still a project that had already gone through a full process. It had gone through neighborhood meetings. It had gone through design review. There was, it is up to the board whether there is a desire for additional process on that regard. This to staff feels like a major amendment. It was reviewed thoroughly with every division and department to make sure that it came back for a full staff review. It did undergo that entire staff review that full applications typically undergo. Are there concerns with the process that you or the board have related to the application?
Yeah, I am a little concerned, Emily. Can you please explain to me the difference between the public engagement process that would occur for a major amendment that this is being styled as, versus as if we were to hold this applicant to the standard of a new application? Because a 10-unit differential, a removal of a parking garage, a change in unit mix, a change in materiality, a change in the style of the way that the units are being offered, whether it's by sale or by rental. If I was a neighbor to this project, I would say this is not at all what came to us in any sort of formal neighborhood meeting. This is a completely different thing. And I'd like to have some clarity on what would be different between the process that was undertaken for this major amendment as to what the process would be were it to be considered basically a new application.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So a new application, a full application must go through a pre-submittal meeting. It must go through a first neighborhood meeting and then design review with the Urban Design Commission. Then it must go back for a second neighborhood meeting, and then a completed application is submitted, which undergoes staff review before coming to the review board for a public hearing. A major amendment is something where the applicant requests a plan revision. The planning director determines whether it is the changes are de minimis, and which are incredibly minor, or whether it is a major amendment, and this was clearly a major amendment. Because there was an additional special permit, this had to go for a neighborhood meeting, and there is a separate process related to that special permit. For plan revisions, major amendments, they typically go back to the planning board, or if it's the zoning board, they go back to them. And the planning board determines if additional public process is necessary as well, either with an additional neighborhood meeting, or if a return to the Urban Design Commission is necessary. This application underwent a full staff review, just like a complete application, an original application would have undergone. So the applicant is currently before the board to determine whether additional process is necessary, and for the board to ask questions and evaluate concerns.
Emily, I really appreciate that response. That's exactly what I was looking for, is where were we in circumstance 1 versus circumstance 2, as to where we were, in September of 2022, which wasn't that long ago. So thank you very much. That totally answered my question. I would, if no other members of the board have any questions of Emily or of Andrew at this time, I would welcome the applicant to resume their presentation.
Great, thank you, Michael. Tanya Carey again. So I'll just pick up where I left off. So the last change we made was to relocate the bike room from the subsurface garage level to grade level, and this provides much easier access to the bikes for everyday use. And we did increase the bike count to go along with the increased unit count. So just a recap of the approved floor plans, where you can see the breakdown here that you were speaking of. 18 one-bedrooms, 4 one-bedroom plus studies, 17 two-bedrooms, and 2 three-bedroom units. And you can see our footprint that we formally proposed. I'll go into the ground floor in more detail on another slide. And our new proposed floor plans, keeping the same footprint and same shell all the way up that we had before, and just adding the 10 units to have 51 units. So we are proposing 11 studios, 21 bedrooms, 8 two-bedrooms, and 2 three-bedrooms. And for the roof, we are still proposing our common roof deck with green roof, which you'll see on the landscape presentation. So for the ground floor, this was our improved site plan previously. So we had 11 covered parking spaces access off Bedford Street. And then we had our garage ramp, which sloped down here. We had our commercial on Medford Street and our residential lobby on South Street here. And our new proposed plan looks very similar, but the major change to the ground floor plan would be moving the bike room up here. It now has access from 3 ways for convenience for the building residents. So they can access it through the garage area, from a pathway from Warren Street, and from inside the building lobby. So it's a fully enclosed conditioned bike room. And then we have our 12 spaces. Some of the concerns we had at former meetings with you guys on the previous approval was adding these rideshare spaces and short-term spaces, and then having an area for trucks to pull in with increased ceiling height here for move-ins or deliveries, and a rear entrance right directly to a package room. So we have maintained all that exactly as before as well. And just a recap of our zoning, we are proposing to comply with the zoning ordinance dimensional table. And the things that we are seeking is the special permit for reduced parking spaces. And I believe as we did go through this process, it was actually brought up at the planning board meetings previously, asking why we weren't seeking that formally. Now we are seeking it. And the project also received a special permit for household living use, which is part of the major amendment here. And just a quick overview of our zoning maps. We are in the MR4. We are not in the transit area, but you can see we're directly across the street from it. So Dave will speak more to transit on a later slide. And Medford Street is a pedestrian street. So as far as our proposed rendering and facade scheme, so we did keep the building the same. So the only change I will point out is that we changed this material, the fifth material here, from metal standing seam to composite board and batten, but we did keep the same color. So that is the material on the base. We kept the masonry treatment on the ground floor. So we have two forms of masonry, gray brick on Bedford Street side, and then it turns into the cast stone. And that was to split the building facades since the length of the building is over 100 feet. So I won't go into too much detail on it. We did work closely with the UDC in the first round to come up with this scheme after many iterations. So we really wanted to maintain that same design. And here are the proposed flat rendered elevations so that you can see. Warren Street, we have the same design carried around from Medford Street with the bays and balconies in the white face frame. And then on Medford Street and South Street and Bedford Street, we have that design carried around with the different color scheme. And the facade is broken up by a series of bays and balconies just to give it some movement as you look at it. And the rear elevations, we didn't change these. We worked very closely with you guys on these in the former approval to carry the same design around and give it kind of a design when our first pass was a little lacking in design. So we've kept that design that we've showed last time. And just a few additional views to give you an idea from Medford Warren Street corner and from Bedford Street corner. So with that, I will turn it over to Erin from Verdant Landscape Architecture to show you the landscape revisions and process that we've continued since our last time meeting with you guys.
Thank you, Tanya. Erin Hosseini Fitch from Verdant Landscape Architecture. I will briefly go over the landscape updates. Just to note, the overall concept has remained the same as the previously approved plan, and the revisions are limited to several minor updates in the landscape. So looking first at the at-grade landscape, the extension of the sidewalk to a 12-foot width previously consisted of a 6-foot width concrete public right-of-way and a 6-foot width tree well and furnishing zone. Following feedback received from the city as well as requests from mobility, in conjunction with the new development across Warren Street at 8 Medford, we have increased the right-of-way to an 8-foot width and the tree well furnishing zone reduced to 4-foot width to accommodate. The tree wells themselves are designed at 3.5 by 12 feet and have been located in coordination with the city's PSUF department. Additionally, the plant mix within the streetscape, as well as the rest of the site, has been updated to reflect more native plantings, as well as specific planting to support biodiversity and local pollinators following neighborhood discussions we had, and as requested by the Union Square Neighborhood Committee. The other notable revision to landscape design is as a result of the removal of the below-grade garage parking, as Tanya just went through. The previous landscape plan proposed 9 upright trees along the rear property line. Now, as shown on the current plan, the extent of the plant beds have been extended, and we're able to propose an additional 2 upright trees along here. So now we have a total of 11 deciduous trees along the rear property lines. And these additional trees will help to further buffer views of the new development. And next slide. The roof deck has remained as an exterior amenity deck for residents and continues to provide an extensive green roof system around the deck. In further response to the Union Square Neighborhood Committee, the plant mix here as well has been updated to a mostly native mix, and also in addition of accent perennials are woven into the sedum to further encourage that biodiversity. And then the next slide. And then as noted here, the project has maintained the required green score for the MR4 zoning district, exceeding the 0.25 score. And that summarizes the landscape updates. And then to our traffic engineer, David Giangrande. Thank you.
David, are you
David.
there?
This is Raisa speaking. David, you are unmuted. I'm not sure if you're having any kind of technical issues. This is Raisa speaking again. David, can you hear us?
Tony, you want to go through the slides so we're not holding up the board? David's obviously having some technical issues.
Yeah, if you could.
Tanya, could you go to the next slide?
Yeah, sorry, I just called him. He cannot get his sound to work, but we will try our best to.
So there is a way for people to physically call in too. We've had both members and applicants do that.
Okay, that's on the, perhaps he can do that.
On the agenda, yes, is the call-in number.
Okay, so I'll start and we'll see if he calls in best I can. I'm not a traffic engineer, but so here's our existing condition and proposed site. So formerly the site was, as you know, Cubby Oil and Somerville Gas. And I think some of the items he was going to speak to were the existing condition trips versus the proposed condition trips. So in the AM, there was 42 trips, and in the PM, 56. That's on average. And then our proposed site in total, 688 trips. That was the existing condition with the gas station. The proposed site would have an average of 220 trips. I know we don't have parking for all of the vehicles, but there are still different trips like drop-offs and deliveries and whatnot. So what we are proposing are the 51 residential units, rentals, and for parking, 12 spaces, vehicle spaces. 2 of those are short-term drop-off spaces for deliveries, pickups, drop-offs, packages, stuff like that. And 2 of them are proposed to be rideshare spaces. And for commercial, we do have a long-term bike space as well. The commercial space is less than 5,000 square feet, so it doesn't require parking. And we have 4 short-term bicycle spaces around the site. And just some traffic or transit info for our site. So we are 0.52 miles to Lechmere and Union Square Green Line Station. So 2 options for train stations just outside of the 0.5 that would be considered within the transit zone and not require parking. We are also a quarter mile to bus routes, 4 different bus routes, 69, 80, 87, and 88. And there is an extensive bike network. So there's a bike lane on Somerville Ave, Prospect at Medford Street connection, and the future plans for the South Street bike lane along our site. And one of the major design features for pedestrians around our site is the enlarged 12-foot sidewalks on all 4 sides. Currently, there are not wide sidewalks. So Medford Street currently only has just over 4 feet. That would be enlarged to the full 12 feet and there's also no trees. So it would really improve the pedestrian experience there. South Street has 7'3", Warren Street 7'7", and Bedford Street 10. Those are what we are enlarging by. And some of the crash data. So I won't go into much detail because, as I said, I'm not a traffic expert, but 1 incident in 3 years at Medford and South Street, 1 incident involving a pedestrian, and 1 involving a bicyclist at Warren Street. And no recognized issues need to be mitigated as part of this project was found during the analyzation. And for capacity analysis, there would be 1 decrease in the level of service along South Street and Harding Street northbound, and that would be an 8-second increase. All level of services are greater than 3 in the vicinity, and most are at A or B. So unless he was able to call in and elaborate, I will probably turn it back over to Brian. The last thing I would say would be that I do recognize your comment that these are, pretty substantial changes from our former design, and we are trying to go through the process as we navigated with the planning staff. But we do believe that a lot of these changes are within the goals of the city, including going to net zero passive house, reduce parking, and increased affordable units. So that's all. I'll turn it back to Brian.
Okay. What I'd like to do, at least for tonight and for the next time we see you, because the planning board won't be taking a vote on this application tonight, is to the extent that you're part of the presentation that would have been David Giangrande, if there's anything that David thinks should have been included in the presentation or discussion that wasn't able to happen because of his technical difficulties, I will certainly welcome his participation at the next meeting to be able to round out anything that he feels needs to be brought to the board's attention that wasn't tonight. Because we're in this world of hybrid and virtual, and doesn't always work out. So I've certainly been on the foul end of that before.
Great, thank you.
Is there anybody else on the?
Yeah, this is Attorney McGrail, Chair Capuano. We're happy to.
You happy to what? Sorry.
I'm sorry, Chair Capuano, Attorney McGrail again. That concludes our presentation. We're obviously happy to answer any questions that the board has at this time.
Sure, thank you very much. What I'd like to do is, if the planning board has any comments or questions of the applicant at this time, we can do that. Otherwise, what I'd like to do is open it up to public testimony, but let's see if my colleagues have any comments or questions right now. I see Debbie.
Just a brief question, because maybe it'll help with the public testimony. I was looking back at some of our other comments at the prior hearing, and one of the concerns that was raised, which is a concern of mine as well, is the lack of family-size housing in the city. And I know that's being reduced with the new unit mix, and that was a concern raised even with the prior unit mix. So I was interested in hearing what why that decision was made. I assume it's obviously financial driven, and that was a result of maybe going from rental to condo, and if that impacted, or sorry, the reverse, condo to rental, if that impacted the changes to the unit mix.
Mr. Chair, this is Hugo DiBiase, part of the ownership group here. If you want, I can answer that question now, or if you want more questions to be heard, it's up to you.
If you're welcome to, because my overarching question, I think, is certainly subsumed by Debbie's as well, is what the heck happened in the last 9 months? Between conception and birth here, we've got a completely new application.
Sure. Yeah, and I can speak to that to the best of my ability. Again, my name is Hugo DiBiase for the record. I'm part of Somerville Living LLC, part of the family-owned and operated business that owns this property now. So a quick little background of why we're here. So our team, after receiving approvals from your board, advance these plans along in the ordinary course of business to get to a construction drawing set that we could then that we could then submit to the building department. And there's been some macroeconomic changes since that time, and there's been some microeconomic changes as well. But on the site specifically, as these plans are conceptual in basis, and there's a lot more engineering and structural evaluation and geotechnical evaluation and things of that nature. The specific property has a very high water table. It has hazardous materials on site, and the very unique specific site specific layout fronting on 4 different streets. And dovetailing that with the macro side of it and talking with sales and marketing professionals, our previous project, that subgrade parking garage, was economically infeasible and was also, from a construction standpoint, potentially not feasible as well. The loading ramp going down to the subgrade parking garage had issues to meet structural elements. And then, like I said, the high water table causing a what they call a hydrostatic uplift of the building. So in any event, it wasn't looking like it was going to work. And so what my team and what my family decided to do was, take something from a for sale opportunity, meaning for sale condos, and be a long-term investor in the city and in this neighborhood, and be the owner of a apartment building that we would like to do at a first-class rate. And in doing so, we looked at the building and figured that we wanted to go to the passive house side of energy code. And what that allows, as you know, through your zoning, is a different density factor. And what we did was we took some of the larger 2-beds that are more typical on a for sale condo project and oriented them more for a transit-oriented apartment building. What Tanya said at the beginning was, we could build 58 studios, but that's not what we thought was best for this neighborhood and best for this area. We do value a mixture of all different type of potential renters at the site, and we think that there's still a good mixture of that. So that's kind of where our team and our ownership group is at right now for this project. And hopefully that may answer some of your questions, comments, and/or concerns, but obviously open to have further dialogue as well.
So that actually, Debbie, did that answer the question that you had?
Yeah, maybe that was more a question.
I have a follow-up question, but I want to make sure that Debbie's is satisfied first.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to understand a bit more about the changes to the unit mixes and sizes.
Yeah, we were able to, like Tanya said, the building footprint, the actual foundation of this building, the actual massing of this building, the height of this building, none of that's changing. All the balconies, all the bays, I think it's 78% of the units to have private outdoor spaces. And, it's very typical for an apartment complex to have smaller units. But we also value having a mixture of potential clientele at this property to create a more vibrant and robust neighborhood scene as well. And so, we did look at some of the larger one bedrooms that were about over 1,000 square feet. Those are the ones that you see are the studios now in purple here. And we were able to make those work to accommodate 2 studios instead of a large 1,000+ square foot one bed. And we maintained the 2 3-bedrooms for the ADU units. And there is some redesign of some other units as well.
Thank you.
Debbie, are you good? I just have a follow-up question on the response that Mr. DiBiase gave a minute ago.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. So, Mr. DiBiase, you mentioned some both macroeconomic factors, which certainly, I get, but also microeconomic factors. And you, as I remember what you mentioned, said something about the water table issue as well as the grading of the underground garage. How is any of this not something that was reviewed in the original application and the tests that would have been done to see if a building that you presented to us back in September would have been feasible to build? I would imagine that something like the groundwater table is something that's pretty standard to be able to identify prior to making an application to the city for a big building like this.
Sure, and that's a fair question to ask. We did do plenty of testing on the site, both from an environmental side and a geotechnical side. Both of those do get water readings. The actual structural design of it wouldn't happen until a plan is approved, when we take it from a schematic drawing set and advance it to a construction drawing set, where we start to figure out load calculations. The subgrade parking garage that we were looking at, we were talking about a full 0 lot line excavation, sheathing down 45 feet, 500 truckloads of soil coming out of the property. And, there's other elements at play, current landfills in Massachusetts being capped, other regulations like that. So what we were trying to do is to come up with what we thought was the best opportunity for a repurpose and redevelopment of this existing site, because the former project with the subgrade parking garage financially wasn't working out, and practically speaking, from a construction standpoint, was not going to work out as we advanced these plans. So we decided as a team that we don't want to give up on this site, and we want to produce something that's first class and is a value add to the neighborhood and to the city of Somerville. And like I said, we are thrilled to potentially be long-term investors and owners and neighbors here, and that's why we're back in front of your board with this redesign plan.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions of the applicant or staff at this time before I open it up to public testimony? Okay. Seeing none, what I'd like to do is open up this public hearing to oral testimony. I see 2 folks who have their hands raised already, both of whom are from the applicant team. I would just ask you to unclick that. Thank you. So for anybody that wants from the public that would like to speak, and provide testimony in support of this application, please click the raised hand button and I will call on you in the order in which I see you. Not enough people here for me to really say I'm going to have a 2-minute timer, so let's see. Going once, going twice. Actually, I see Mark Truant. So I could please have Mark Truant unmuted.
This is Raisa speaking. Mark Truant, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
And for the purpose of the record, if you can please state your name and residential address for the record.
My name is Mark, M-A-R-C, Truant, T-R-U-A-N-T. I live at 32 Warren Street in Cambridge, not too far from the site. And yeah, it's complicated in terms of listening to, your point about, I understand that engineering isn't done all of the engineering isn't done from the get-go, but where this was a gas station and oil company site, one would think that more investigation was done preliminarily. However, I feel that the developer has made a very good effort in reconstituting the project, and in fact, sort of keeping the hazardous waste there. I don't know if they're going to do remediation in place of the subsoils. I would hope that they're going to do that. But at any rate, I understand reducing parking. I think that that's a reasonable thing in today's world. And so the project itself, as a neighbor, I think it really is a very good effort. What really concerns me about this project and the project across Warren Street, in the same way that you're bundling a couple of the issues for this project in one meeting, I really think Somerville needs to get together and look at the Warren Street, Medford Street intersection with both of these projects and understanding. Now, on the side of the street that this project is on Warren Street, there's no parking, and I don't think there's going to be any parking. And this project has made some allowances for ride sharing, temporary parking, and truck loading and unloading off of Bedford Street, which is reasonable. The project across the street does not have these things. And anyone that understands Warren Street understands that if parking is on that curve, if somebody puts up the site plan, you can see it, but if parking is on that curve, then traffic backs up. And just 2 weeks ago, there was a fire truck, that had its siren and everything going. It couldn't get down Warren Street. We've had often need for ambulances. There are people with health issues on the street, and from time to time need an ambulance. If an ambulance gets backed up there, that's not a good thing. And so I like the wide sidewalks, but maybe on the project across the street, Somerville has to look at that and say, maybe that sidewalk is reduced or the building is moved back, and then there's some space for temporary ride share or delivery. Because I'm very concerned from the last community meeting on that project, they showed parking right up to the intersection and right around that curve. And that's a recipe for disaster. It's going to make a bad situation even worse. So I would just, I know you're talking about this project right now, but frankly, I look at them together because they're both going to happen about the same time. and they're going to, together, they're going to have a big impact on us. You know, one impact from this building is that because there's no parking, people are going to seek out people that do have cars, because some people will still have cars. They are going to be parking on Cambridge streets. Now that becomes Cambridge's problem.
Mr. Page, I'll ask you, I didn't put on a 2-minute timer, but I will ask you to be
Okay.
back at other
So,
people.
so that's the other impact and fallout from this project that is going to affect the residents along Cambridge Street, Porter Street, is there will be parking, and that's also going to add to the traffic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to speak in support of the application? Please raise your hand now. Okay, going once, going twice. Seeing none, I would like to open up the public hearing for anybody that wants to speak in opposition to the application or otherwise express concern. Please exercise your raised hand button and I'll call on you. Going once. I see Tori Antonino.
This is Raisa speaking. Tori, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
Hi, my name is Tori Antonino. I live at 65 Boston Street. I will say that Hugo and his team have reached out to the Union Square Neighborhood Council. Since April, we have been really in full election mode, as we just had our election. So we haven't had a chance to meet. We've met once, but haven't had a chance to meet with them again, although they have reached out and are very much willing to meet and hopefully discuss a potential CBA. That said, my concern, I have a few concerns. One is that the last meeting they had was February, the neighborhood meeting was the 27th in 2023. And before that was in January of 2022. And there was a lot of changes during that time. I don't know if I think that this is a major amendment plan. I'm kind of leaning towards that it be a new plan with sufficient neighborhood meetings. I know they've met with the planning staff. I wonder, have they met with the Urban Design Commission again? If they haven't, I think that the process probably needs to start again. My concerns of the community was the reduction of 2 bedrooms, going from, I think, 17 to 8, and that there would no longer need to be a remediation, of course, which would be costly. I'm glad that there was the reduction of parking is in the proposal, but I guess my concern is that they're going from condos to rentals, and they're no longer having to remediate. No, they're going to have to remediate. They're no longer have to remove the soil totally, and that they're going from 41 units to 51. So I'm just wondering how much revenue that they will be gaining in order to not have to do the parking and not having to do the going from 51 units from 41, and that I wanted to just be able to benefit as a community, to really benefit as a community. I think we need to relook at this project, and there actually are changes that the Union Square Neighborhood Council would request in addition to small monies that Hugo and his team and the Union Square Neighborhood Council talked about, and that would be to have more 2-bedroom units be affordable. And I just have a real concern on page, I don't know, on slide A023 of, I guess it's called the plan set. I was looking over the affordable units and the mix, And I counted 17 affordable units in this one slide. And I know that's not correct. If it is correct and your team wants to do that, huzzah. But I just wanted clarification on what the mix is, because again, in counting what is on this slide, it's you go above and beyond the call of duty. So thank you. I have a lot more thoughts on this. I really think we need to have another neighborhood meeting. I look forward to meeting with the Union Neighborhood Council, meeting again with Hugo and his team. And I'm just, the jury's out for me personally on this project until it's before the UDC and until there's another neighborhood meeting. I spoke over 2 minutes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tori. Anybody else want to speak in opposition of the application or otherwise express concern? Going once, going twice. Seeing none, I am going to close that portion of the public hearing and bring it back to discussion by members of the planning board. I will say this. Tori and I think are aligned on this. I'm a little surprised that there aren't more folks from the community here to discuss something that I think is a pretty substantive amendment, if not basically what otherwise should have been considered, I think, a new application, to discuss this, because there was some pretty robust discussion for the application that we actually approved back in October or November of 22. I think this would benefit from having another neighborhood meeting when one hasn't been had in quite a while and isn't subject to the same processes necessarily as a new application would. The planning board can certainly and has instructed applicants to work with ward aldermen and at large to hold neighborhood meetings to make sure that everybody's concerns are raised and that the modifications to the previous application are heard by the neighborhood. So I would be in favor of making that request of the applicant. That's me. I would love to hear what my colleagues think as well on kind of any aspect of this application, not just what's been raised, if you have any thoughts. I see Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe a couple questions relevant to the special permit for parking relief. With less parking available, I was hoping you could detail the drop-off locations for rideshare. I realize that there are some of these available in the underground parking, but realistically, sort of on the ground, you've got 10 additional units, many of which are studios and one-bedrooms. Where does an Uber driver basically pick up and drop off someone? So if you could just sort of take me through that story. And then maybe the second question, which could potentially be answered at a subsequent meeting, is you could remind me how the bus routes that you mentioned that are within that quarter-mile walk shed are affected by the MBTA bus network redesign. A lot of our current bus network is not going to be our future bus network, and we're designing a building for both today and tomorrow. So I would really appreciate sort of how you've taken those two into consideration. Those are my two. Yeah.
Oh, should I respond now or?
I'm happy to take them now or at a subsequent meeting. I know we're running late and I don't want to monopolize all the time. So okay. I'm happy to hold off if you guys would like to give a more substantive answer later on.
I can briefly speak to the rideshare. So it's very simple, identical to what we proposed last time. So we have the entrance off of Bedford Street. We have 2 short-term spaces right there for drop-offs and deliveries. We have our 2 rideshare spaces, And I think the planning staff wanted these a little bit reorganized, which we're happy to assign whichever one they want. And then from there, we have a back door, which goes right into the main lobby, has a package room, and you're right in from there. So we did not change that from the prior proposal.
Okay. And then happy to talk about the bus networks maybe next time around. I realize it might require a little research.
I think that would have to be answered by Dave Giagrande or Mobility or someone else. So
I also, Mr. Chair, if I may, I see Andrew's hand up. If you would
go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Member Gino. I can't answer the bus question at this time. I will discuss that with mobility staff tomorrow or sometime next week. But I wanted to address the plan for the parking. You may have read in the staff memo, we recommended a condition that a third space be used for short-term parking spaces. I want to just note that there was a slight error, inconsistency in what was stated in the analysis and what was actually proposed in the recommended conditions. The recommended condition should read that staff recommended an additional spot be used for short-term parking spaces, not ride share. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to the board of what staff are proposing. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Does anybody else have any comments or questions right now? Yes, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I completely understand the concerns that have been raised about this rising to the level of being a new application rather than a major amendment. But I would also just ask whether there are recognizing the need for housing of all kinds to be built, with as few impediments as possible. I do wonder if there is anything we can do to facilitate it moving back through that process in a timely fashion, if that's the direction we're headed, or or if there are items that we might be able to resolve with the applicant in conversations like these, so that if it goes back to that, it is already aligned with the board's goals. I'm thinking in particular of the unit mix topic, which sounds like it is something that is of concern both to the community and to other members of the board, but just raising that as a consideration.
Thanks, Amelia. I'm wondering if a lot of these concerns that the board has raised would be fleshed out better at a neighborhood meeting to figure out where the neighborhood is on this, so that we can have a fulsome report back saying we met with folks and this is where we are all comfortable with, and here's where people still have some hang-ups. I mean, we heard from a few folks tonight on public testimony, but it's a different type of application, right? It's, you wouldn't necessarily, I think, get the public comment in an oral form without a neighborhood meeting as you would with, and I, having read the staff memo, there are folks that have concerns as well, and I think it would be beneficial for the process and for the, particularly for the neighborhood, but also for the process, for this board to ask this applicant to have a neighborhood meeting. And look, if we come back and everybody's fine with where we are on this, that's good as well.
This is, Mr. Chair, if I may, this is Hugo DiBiase, again, with the applicant team. We have no objection to having another neighborhood meeting. We're very open and honest, and like Tori said, we've been in communication with Tori and her team, trying to find what the best solution would be for all of us as neighbors of this area. And we would welcome that. I don't know from a processy standpoint. I mean, we can start that process as soon as tomorrow, but then I'd have to defer to Andrew and the planning staff on what that means in terms of coming back to the board. We did have that neighborhood meeting as required for this plan review. and we had great participation. I think it was 2 hours long, where we did discuss a lot of these items, and we followed up accordingly with the parties that had further questions and comments, specific to remediation, specific with Tory and the Union Square neighborhood group, and then we submitted a complete application to the board. So like I said, we're open and ready to go and have another neighborhood meeting. And if there's things that can further be solved, we would love to solve them. And if there are items that need to be changed, we'll be happy to present that to the board here. And if there aren't changes, then we'd be back in front of the board as well.
Thanks. I appreciate that response, Hugo, because one of the things that I have seen in being on this board is a lot of the concerns that are raised oftentimes by members of this board and by the community are sometimes best solved by a neighborhood meeting to work out some of those issues, come back with some sort of a consensus. And if there's not a consensus, at least we know where kind of the sticking points are. But there were concerns raised by members of this board. There were concerns raised by neighbors tonight. There were concerns I saw raised in the staff memorandum that was derivative of the meeting that was held in February. So I think for the benefit of this project and for the benefit of the neighborhood, that as one member, I would suggest that you work with the appropriate ward council or councilors at large to hold one more neighborhood meeting so that we can really flesh out some of these issues and maybe come to some solutions before the planning board has to deal with things that could otherwise be solved through a community-based process.
Absolutely. I agree.
All right. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I may, to add on to the neighborhood meeting, one thing that would help me to evaluate the robustness of that is just to have a better understanding of, either the February neighborhood meeting or the one that may or may not be coming up, how many members of the community are attending. 2-hour-long discussion with, 3 people is a lot different than a 2-hour-long discussion with 53 people, just to help us understand.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, like that was pretty much the comment there. Just to help us, really be comfortable that, this major amendment is getting the sort of robust feedback from the community. And maybe just one comment as one board member, I would, I don't know, I guess appreciate any discussion that you might have now or later on, what you've done to consider potentially more higher, like 3-bedroom counts, like these true family size units, even if they're not the, capital A type affordable. And also, if anything, what you've considered to be a good landlord in the area as you're proposing for, making studio and 1-bedroom units affordable enough so that people who would have otherwise banded together in 3-bedroom units are actually in 1-bedroom units, thereby freeing up 3-bedroom units across the community. That whole economic argument that we're all trying to grapple with as a city to meet the Somerville or Summer vision for more family size units and really more housing in general. So, I mean, again, happy to take those at another time, but that as one member, that would be sort of what would help me evaluate this in terms of, okay, are we still getting neighborhood feedback, and are we still meeting our goals for additional units? Thank you.
No, thank you. Does anybody want to make any comments on the nature of the application now to give the applicant perhaps a little bit of guidance as to where we as a board are viewing the status? Yes, Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess a couple broad reactions from me on just the sum total of the proposal, and then I'll end with just one clarification on where we seem to be headed on process. But in terms of substance, a lot of the discussion so far has focused on concerns, and understandably so, because that's sort of the nature of these conversations, where it's people are raising the things they have concerns with to have them addressed. But I just want to say there's a lot I really like about this project. It's very transit rich. You know, it's on this awkward, 2/100ths of a mile outside of a Green Line stop kind of location, but very transit rich in terms of bus access. There's a great new bike lane right there. So I just think, putting dense new housing in this location seems like a great thing to me. In terms of the unit mix, my perspective on it is I'm kind of torn, frankly. I mean, all things equal, more units with more bedrooms is what we'd all love. But I also think there's a real need in an urban area like ours for, affordable, and I mean that sort of lowercase a affordable, not necessarily income restricted, smaller units. So I don't know, if I had to choose between a 1,000, square foot one bedroom or two 500 square foot studios or something, I might like the two small studios. And so it's just to say, I'm not sure I even have major concerns around the current proposal around the unit mix. So, that's one member's perspective on the unit mix stuff. In terms of parking, again, sort of all things equal, sure, it's great to have parking, but I'm not a big fan of requiring any parking, from a city perspective, and letting developers figure out where there's market demand. So if this project's not clamoring for more parking, that seems fine to me. So I'm pretty excited about the broad contours of this. Just wanted to state that out loud, so there was some sense of some positive feelings. I'll just end with the question on process. It sounds like, and I know we just haven't even decided yet, but it sounds like the direction of pushing for another neighborhood meeting is to still keep this in the realm of major revisions rather than totally restarting as a new application, and we could just request a second neighborhood meeting that would address the major revisions. Am I roughly tracking that direction of this correctly, or am I missing it actually?
Yeah. Luke, I'm not actually sure that we as the planning board can determine that this is a new application. I don't think the ordinance allows us to, and the statute allows us to make that determination. What I think our authority is under that is to be able to guide the applicant to certain processes that could mirror something closer to a new application, things like an additional neighborhood meeting, where I think this board might be heading, and review from other boards that they otherwise would have been required to get clearance from, that they wouldn't necessarily with the major amendment. I don't think we can kind of strike the words major amendment and replace it with new application. I don't think that's within our purview. But I think that answers the question that you had on that.
Thank you. Yep.
And thank you for your comments, Luke. I don't mean to be kind of stepping all over the applicant. I really do appreciate some of the value that the changes do bring, but I am concerned with some of them, and I'll raise them at a future meeting, particularly after I hear from the report from staff and from the applicant, and hopefully members of the community of what a neighborhood meeting will kind of suss out. Because just because I think something doesn't mean, my view is the only one that matters for sure. Does anybody else have anything they would like to address at this point in the evening? Yes, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to say that on the two issues that have come up on the question of unit mix, I am curious to hear the community feedback. On the topic of the parking waiver, I I'm certainly in support of that. As I recall from the applicant's first round with us, concerns about parking and traffic circulation around this building were one of the issues that the neighborhood was most concerned about. So I think that from both a sustainability perspective and a community perspective, the decision to limit the number of parking spaces to the ones at grade sounds like an improvement.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah, I'd like to echo the vice chair's comments. I'm also very supportive about the parking relief. I just would want to emphasize restricting renters from being able to get on-street parking permits, because we don't want to just take that parking need and then dump it onto the streets. I think that'll cause something that we don't want. And I also would encourage the applicant to consider making sure that the amenities for the 3-bedroom renters be robust. One thing that's becoming more and more popular within our city is, biking kids to school and making sure you're able to kind of take the kids around town in a bike. And I do appreciate that this applicant now has these larger spaces for the bikes. And I would just encourage the applicant to make sure that we've got enough of those for these 2 and 3 bedroom units that we can support families to live here as well.
Thank you. Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is the last one for me, I promise. This is maybe just a comment for staff, building on one of the public comments that we received tonight about sort of taking Warren Street as a holistic sort of approach. And I know it's outside of this particular applicant, but sort of for just as a chance to raise a question, I would be interested in, what's the current thinking along Warren Street. I know, full disclosure, I work in Kendall. I go to the gym in East Somerville. I walk past the street a couple times a week. Traffic is in fact a nightmare, and trying to sort of turn right or left off of Warren Street when you're coming from Kendall can get really bad. And it's outside of the conditions of this particular application, but perhaps this application gives us an opportunity to think about that as we're thinking about sort of mobility in this situation generally. So this is, I don't know if I necessarily expect to discuss it here, but just to raise it for staff as potentially something to think about as we're already thinking about this intersection. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. I don't know if it necessarily requires a vote per se, but it is the maybe just an informal poll. Is anybody opposed to the idea of asking the applicant, who seems to be amenable to it, to holding another neighborhood meeting before reconvening with the board? No. Okay. Mr. DiBiase, I think that's certainly something that you have indicated a willingness and an excitement to do. So please, I look forward to hearing what happens from the neighborhood meeting that you will be having in the hopefully the near future, you and your team.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, board, for your time. We will circle back after we've had that neighborhood meeting.
Okay.
Thank you all.
I don't know when that meeting is going to happen, but I will just move to continue this discussion to the 15th. And if it needs a further continuance, if the meeting doesn't happen at that time, that's fine. I see Andrew.
Mr. Chair, if I could recommend, just because it's very unpredictable when neighborhood meetings could be scheduled, that you just continue it to a future meeting and not specify a date.
I can do that.
Your discretion, of course.
I'm just a little concerned if the public sees that it's just been continued to date uncertain, that they won't know when.
Let me rephrase. I forgot that this is a public hearing, so you're correct. Sorry about that. I rescind that comment.
Okay. If the applicant has not had the opportunity to have a neighborhood meeting before the 15th, they're certainly more than welcome to request one, so that when we do reconvene, we can make sure that the public is well aware of the fact that it will be heard. So the chair moves to continue this application to the 15th of June, seconded by Amelia. Rice, could you please call the roll?
This is Rice speaking. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Aaron Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Thank you very much to the applicant. We will tentatively see you in a few weeks, but maybe a little bit longer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
I don't believe there are any other items on the agenda tonight. Before I move to adjourn, Rice, just remind me, there's nothing else, right? We have no other business.
This is Rice speaking. There are no other business tonight.
Great. Seeing no other business before the planning board, I will move to adjourn this meeting of the board, seconded by Amelia. Rice, if you could call the roll.
This is Rice speaking again. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Aaron Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Thank you all very much. Unanimous vote. The meeting is adjourned. See you in a few weeks.
Night.
Thank you. Have a good night.